Tell Fox News President Trump is now expected to withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord. Such a move, if made official, is already being blasted by Democrats as a threat to national and global security. Good morning. Welcome to Happening Now. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Heather Childers in for Jenna Lee. Nice to be with you again.
Great to have you here, Heather.
Well, of course, this news comes as some new information is released in this ever-expanding Russia investigation, now involving some key members of the president's inner circle, including his own attorney. And we're also awaiting remarks this hour from Veterans Affairs Secretary David Shulkin in a rare appearance in the White House briefing room.
Let's get to Chief White House correspondent John Roberts live on the North Lawn now. John.
John, good morning to you. The president obviously has been watching the coverage this morning on the Paris Agreement, and the president is expected to withdraw the United States. Tweeting about an hour ago, quote, "I will be announcing my decision on the Paris Accord over the next few days. Make America great again." A senior administration official told me earlier this morning that the president has not yet made a final decision on what to do, but two sources tell Fox News that the president is expected to announce that the U.S. will withdraw from the Paris Accord. There's another possibility, too, that it's kind of, a Solomon-like decision here where you split the baby, that the United States could withdraw from the Global Climate Fund, but still stay within the framework of the agreement. The president spent a lot of time, you're seeing the pictures here, talking to European leaders and our allies in Japan during the G7 conference about climate change and the Paris Accord. Gary Cohn, who is the president's chief economic advisor, said that his position on it was evolving, but we don't know if it's evolved to the point where he actually wants to stay in or if he'll get out, because there's a lot of pressure from factions here at the White House for him to remove the United States altogether from the Paris Accord. Here's what the press secretary Sean Spicer said about it yesterday at the briefing.
This is the subject that the president is spending a great deal of time on, and one that he spoke to the G7 members about during their meetings. Ultimately, he wants a fair deal for the American people.
Meantime, there are some new developments today on the Russia investigation. The House and Senate Intelligence Committees have requested documents and testimony from the president's longtime personal attorney, Michael Cohen. Cohen is declining for the moment to provide what the committees are asking for. Cohen telling Fox News, quote, "The request was poorly phrased, overly broad, and not capable of being answered." Cohen also said, quote, "I find it irresponsible and improper that the request sent to me was leaked by those working on the committee," and finished up by telling Fox News, quote, "If subpoenaed, I will gladly comply, as I have absolutely nothing to hide." And the president is taking to Twitter to support one-time advisor to the Trump campaign, Carter Page. Page had asked to testify before the House Intelligence Committee about alleged falsehoods about him that were spread by James Comey, John Brennan, and others. Democrats on the committee asked that Page's appearance, which was tentatively scheduled for June the 7th, be postponed indefinitely. The president saying, quote, in a tweet, "So now it's reported that Democrats who have excoriated Carter Page about Russia don't want him to testify. He blows away their case against him and now wants to clear his name by showing the false or misleading testimony by James Comey, John Brennan, hashtag witch hunt." Carter Page had asked to testify. The intelligence had not reached out to him. He was named in that unverified Russian document, the point of contact between the Trump campaign and he disputes that, even though he has been to Russia a couple of times. All of this goes, a lot of moving parts. Make sense of it all before the day.
You're going to have a busy day there at the White House, Mr. Roberts. It looks like it. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts, thank you.
Thanks.
So climate change, just one subject mentioned in an early morning tweet storm from the president, who blamed Democrats over the calling it a witch hunt. He commented on a controversial video from Kathy Griffin and made another pitch for a health care vote. Jake Sherman is senior writer for Politico, co-author of Politico's Playbook. We were just talking, two sources are telling John Roberts that the president is expected to pull the U.S. out of the Paris climate agreement. That would fit with the campaign promises made by now President Trump, would it not?
It would, but I don't think we've seen the end of the story. I think there's a possibility, my reporting sources tell me, there's a possibility that he might do something, like John said, stop a little bit of fully withdrawing from the climate deal and try to seek a better deal. It would be very Trumpian, I guess we could say, to try to stop short of pulling out and instead getting a better deal, or what he considers a better deal for the country. He has gotten some flack from even Republicans on Capitol Hill who have said, you know, this is a step too far. So we'll see how this progresses. Donald Trump on Twitter this morning, as all these reports were coming out, said, I'm going to announce my decision in the next couple days. So I think this story has not yet seen its full horizon.
But he has gotten some support from a former Republican Speaker of the House, which said this morning on Fox and Friends.
Pull out. It'll be a real signal to the world that, in fact, we have changed. We are putting American interests first. If there are things we can negotiate, but we don't need to be involved in gigantic multinational projects in which more money is spent by diplomats traveling.
More money spent by diplomats traveling. Is that a perceived problem of the Paris Climate Accords, that it's all, you know, a bunch of, I don't know, pointed heads talking in a room and spending money?
I mean, listen, the United States is obviously involved in diplomacy across the globe. So the fact that diplomats are traveling is not surprising, or frankly would not be alarming to people in politics or many people around the country. What I will say is that a lot of people, Republicans are privately telling us that the United States would be the only country besides Syria and Nicaragua to pull out of this accord, which would, of course, put the United States kind of on a different playing field, out on its own, with Nicaragua, who actually thinks the deal didn't go far enough. So, yes, this would signal a new start, or a new, definitely a new tact for the for American leadership under Donald Trump.
You led off your Politico playbook this morning with the tweet from the president, the tweet heard round the world at 12:06 a.m. The president wrote this: despite the constant negative press covfefe, and then it stopped. That tweet went out, and then about 6 hours later, at a little after 6 this morning, the president writes, who can figure out the true meaning of covfefe? Enjoy. And people are enjoying it. You got to give him that, Jake.
I am enjoying it too, so I will cop to that. But listen, I think if we could take one interesting thing away from this this kind of errant tweet, is that the reports are true. What we've all been reporting for the last couple months is that Donald Trump is in the residence at night with himself, firing off tweets, calling friends, calling advisors, calling other politicians, other lawmakers, which is kind of a new style of leadership for the country. We saw this morning, the Associated Press reported that President Trump gave his cell phone number out to several world leaders, which is very, very unusual, very strange, and has raised some eyebrows in the intelligence community. So definitely a sign that the president is spending time with his cell phone late at night.
You know, talking about, well, it was a big issue during the campaign. He often accused Hillary Clinton of not having the energy, the stamina to be president. So he was up tweeting at 12:06 a.m., even if it wasn't exactly a, well, coherent tweet. And then at 5 a.m., he deleted it. So, you know, I guess the president is, as he said, a man who needs only a few hours sleep. At any rate, he got 126,000 retweets and 160,000 likes for covfefe.
I like that, and I was asleep at that time, so I didn't see it in real time, but I did see it when I woke up.
I was too. Jake Sherman, Politico Playbook. We'll hope he gives you another interesting tweet to play with next time around.
We hope so too.
Thanks, Jake.
Switching gears to a Fox News alert for you. A massive explosion rocking the diplomatic area in Kabul, Afghanistan, killing at least 80 people and wounding more than 300 others in an apparent car bomb. The horrific attack having an international impact, damaging several embassy buildings. Connor Powell's live for us in Jerusalem with those details. Connor?
Yeah, Heather, just in the last few minutes or so, Afghan officials now saying the death toll is up to 90 people and more than 400 injured in this blast. And they're warning these numbers could still increase even further over the course of the next day or so. This was a massive bomb just outside the main diplomatic area in downtown Kabul. This is an area that anyone who spent any time in Kabul has seen or gone through pretty regularly. The crater from the size of this blast was 13 feet deep in a concrete road area. I mean, this was a big area where a lot of trucks go through. This was a main road. and the crater was still 13 feet deep. The blast was felt and did damage more than a mile away across all of Kabul. There were injuries and significant damage, not only to the German embassy and the Turkish embassy in that area, but also to a local television station that was right there. Now, neither ISIS nor the Taliban have claimed credit or responsibility for this attack. The Taliban actually have even condemned it, saying that there was civilians in the area, but ISAF and international officials are looking at both of those groups because they've carried out this type of attack previously in Kabul and really across the country. But the real concern is, how did this vehicle, this large tanker truck full of explosives, get into the middle of the diplomatic area? There was a checkpoint there, but this vehicle had to get through multiple checkpoints to get there. And it really does suggest, once again, that the Afghan security forces are not up to the task of protecting not only the diplomatic area, but the larger city of Kabul and really across the country. This is what the White House is struggling with right now. There are talks about sending more U.S. troops. The Pentagon is pushing to send roughly 5,000 or so more U.S. troops into Afghanistan. The White House is weighing this offer, this contemplation about expanding the U.S. presence in Afghanistan once again, but there are obviously real reservations. What will these U.S. troops do if they're there? And what type of impact would they have on the battlefield against the Taliban in the first place? And would we see a significant increase in U.S. casualties there if the U.S. and the Pentagon do send additional troops there? That's the real concern. Today's attack only makes that distinction and that decision much more difficult about whether or not the U.S. should intervene even further into Afghanistan, Heather.
Right. Connor Powell live for us. Thank you, Connor.
Russia flexes its muscles in Syria, launching cruise missiles against ISIS. We'll tell you exactly what they were targeting. Meanwhile, the U.S. with a launch of its own. There's the Pentagon testing a new way to try to protect our homeland from a nuclear missile. Officials say the test is a success, but just how safe should we feel if there were a real threat raining down from the sky? Fox News Alert, and one day after North Korea conducts the latest in its series of missile tests this year, the Pentagon launches a test of its own. And take a look at this brand new video just released from the Pentagon showing the rocket shooting down a mock ICBM, similar to the kind being developed by North Korea. That was the flash you just saw on screen way up in the sky. Pentagon officials saying it was like hitting a bullet with a bullet and calling the test an incredible accomplishment. Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt live at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, where yesterday's test was launched. Jonathan.
John, you saw that launch of the Interceptor missile first on Fox yesterday afternoon during Shepard Show. Now we've just got from the Department of the Defense all angles of yesterday's successful test. First, take a look at the launch of the ICBM from the Marshall Islands, that intercontinental ballistic missile designed to simulate what North Korea is believed to be working on. That was launched, as I say, from the Marshall Islands in the Pacific Ocean. Then back over to Vandenberg Air Force Base a few minutes later, the launch of the ground-based mid-course interceptor from here. And then the intercept itself. That is when what is essentially a very high-tech precision-guided but essentially 5-foot chunk of metal breaks off from the interceptor missile and hits the ICBM, destroying completely hundreds of miles up in space. Clearly not an easy task. James Searing, who is director of the Missile Defense Agency, very pleased and very relieved last night, saying in a statement, quote, "This system is vitally important to the defense of our homeland, and this test demonstrates that we have a capable, credible deterrent against a very real threat. I am incredibly proud of the warfighters who executed this test and who operate this system every day." Now, this system will be expanded. There are currently 36 of those interceptor missiles, 4 of them where I am right now at Vandenberg Air Force Base, 32 of them up at Fort Greely in Alaska, where our cameras got an exclusive look at the 70-foot deep silos in which those missiles so the crews who are on station every minute of every kind of exercises every single day to make sure they are prepared if a real attack ever comes, John. The cost, by the way, we are just getting information from our own Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon. The cost of yesterday's test, $244 million. The cost of failure, of course, could have been a whole lot higher. John? Exponentially higher. That's very, very true. Jonathan Hunt. Jonathan, thank you.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Stephen Bucci. He is a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense. Thank you so much for us.
Thanks for having me.
So we were just all watching Jonathan Hunt's report there. We have a statement from the director of the Missile. He says that this was an incredible accomplishment and a critical milestone for this program. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. This system is critical for our national security. And the part that they tested yesterday, the ground-based mid-course defense piece, is the hardest part to do. The true science, and it worked. So it's all around to the folks who took a big step forward.
Now, there are others that point out it hasn't worked all the time. In fact, spent $40 million invested in this program since 2002, and of the last 5 attempts, from what I understand, only 2 have been successful, and that is, what, a 40% success rate? Is that acceptable?
Well, it's acceptable because it's the best we can do right now. I mean, this is the equivalent of wearing body armor when you go to combat. It doesn't protect you from everything, but it sure protects the vital pieces. We have deployed the stuff that we have, as good as it is, and we're learning every time we use it. So we've got as much protection as we can get today, and every day we get a little bit more as we continue to develop it.
And I was going to ask, what do we need to do to move that 40% success rate to 100%? Just keep testing?
We have to keep testing. We have multiple pieces to this system. It involves the THAAD, the Aegis Ashore, Aegis Afloat, and the ground-based mid-course defense system. We've got to continue to synchronize all of them and understand that it isn't fully developed yet. We're getting there a little bit at a time. It needs to be in the budget for 2018 and beyond. And if we do that, we can get that level of protection.
Well, and just quickly, do you think that this test is an response to North Korea, response to their launch, and do you think that possibly North Korea take it as a challenge?
They could take it as a challenge, but I don't see that we have any choice. They are aggressively seeking this kind of technology and threatening us with it. We have to continue with our very obvious test. Hopefully some of it's messaging, but some of it is just to show them we have this capability and we will use it to protect ourselves.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve Bucci. We appreciate your insight.
Thank you for having me.
A new allegation by the Federal Aviation Administration could end up costing one major U.S. carrier hundreds of thousands of dollars. Ahead, how the FAA claims the airline endangered the lives of dozens of passengers. Plus, the health care overhaul and changing the tax code, 2 of President Trump's key campaign promises. But where does his agenda stand as the administration deals with the Russia controversies?
Part of the reason that he is frustrated with the Senate rules is because when there is a majority of support on key issues or key people, as the case was in the confirmation progress, he thinks it's standing in the way of progress that the American people have asked for.
New information concerning safety and a global airline. United Airlines could be facing a major fine of almost $500,000 after the Federal Aviation Administration claims the airline failed to inspect a fuel pump pressure switch after replacing it in 2014. The FAA says United flew the Boeing 787 with that switch 23 times before performing the required inspection. A United spokesman says the airline is working closely with the FAA in its review.
Well, with the ongoing investigations into the Trump campaign and its possible ties to Russia, new concerns are swirling on Capitol Hill over the future of President Trump's legislative agenda. A chief congressional correspondent, Mike Emanuel, live for us in Washington with... Hello.
Heather, good morning. Senate Republican staffers are working on a health care bill this Memorial Day recess. I'm told there is, but there isn't legislative language for senators to work on. Iowa's Republican Senators Chuck Grassley and Joni Ernst lowered expectations on fully repealing and replacing Obamacare. They note you need 60 votes in the Senate to fully scrap it, and Republicans only have 52 senators. But Utah Senator Mike Lee says they can still get plenty done.
On tax reform and on the repeal of Obamacare, we can accomplish both of these things with our existing rules with 51 votes. We use a procedure called budget reconciliation. On both of those, we can get past the 60-vote cloture standard on the filibuster. And so in this instance, there's no need for us to change the Senate rules. The rules already allow for us to do what we need to do with 51.
President Trump tweeted about health care this morning, quote, hopefully Republican senators, good people all, can quickly get together and pass a new repeal and replace health care bill. Ads saved money. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer was asked yesterday about potentially spending more to make sure what's next is great.
There's a lot of savings that are coming out of the repeal and replace effort right now. I think we're at $119 billion we saved through the president's efforts. And I think the health care has been something that the president's been very clear on throughout his time as a candidate, well through the presidency, to make sure that the American people get the care and the accessibility that they need.
Players in the Senate are trying to find the right formula to pass a Senate Republican health care plan. They do go to conference to work out differences with the House.
Thank you.
Russia claims it has launched cruise missiles against ISIS targets in Syria from its ships in the Mediterranean. What the Pentagon is saying about that ahead in a live report. Plus, Donald Trump blasting Democrats over the Russia investigation. And now a new video emerges showing the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee piling on. Our panel debates next.
They have tried to destroy this Russian investigation. They've never been serious about it. And one of the great things now that I've stepped aside from this Russian investigation, I can actually say what I want to say.
Dr. David Shulkin, the head of the VA, speaking now at the White House. Important stuff. Let's listen in.
100 days to come to his house to talk about what's happening at VA. And as you know, the president is so committed to fixing issues for veterans that what he has told me is that it is important that we be open and candid and transparent about where the problems are. That as a businessman, the only way to fix the issues in an organization is if you come out and you talk about what those problems are. And so, as you know, I'm a doctor, and I like to diagnose things, assess them, and treat them. And so what you're going to hear today is really a candid assessment of where our problems are in VA, with the focus of a businessman and the skills of a doctor to be able to actually help you with that. And as you know, many of these challenges I'm going to talk about today have been decades in building, and they've spanned multiple administrations. And this is the time for us to really address these chronic problems that have affected veterans and in many ways have harmed veterans and their families by not dealing with these issues. So I'm going to tackle these issues heads on. Just to give you a sense about what we're doing today, I'm going to talk about 13 areas of significant risk for VA. It's going to take about 25 minutes to get through. So if you need to get up and stretch, or if you have ADD and you need to leave, I will not be offended. But I just want to give you a sense about that. We've had 137 different assessments and studies telling VA what's wrong and how to fix it. And what we've done in my first 100 days is to go through these studies, the Commission on Care, independent assessments, as well as our own internal assessments, to come up with these 13 areas of risk that I want to share. So let me start with them. The very first area is access. And of course, as you know, we started with our wait time issue in 2014, the real crisis that began recently at VA. So here's my assessment on access. We've done a significant job in improving access to care for clinically urgent veterans. So people with clinically urgent needs are now being addressed in a much more efficient way. We've developed same-day services in every one of our 168 medical centers for primary care and mental health. And in fact, today,
obviously, it was a big part of the promises of then candidate Trump on the campaign trail, fixing the VA. He chose Dr. David Shulkin, to serve as his VA secretary. Dr. Shulkin is going through some of the changes that have already been made in his agency to try and improve services and reduce wait times for our veterans. We'll have a compilation of those suggestions for you. As you probably heard him say, he's going to be going on for the next 25 minutes. We'll have a compilation of his suggestions and the accomplishments thus far in the second hour of Happening Now.
The Democrats don't want an investigation on Russia. They want an independent commission. Why do they want an independent commission? Because they want to continue the narrative that Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump are best friends, and that's the only reason why he won, because Hillary Clinton could have never lost on her own, so it had to be someone else's fault.
That's the House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes telling Republican donors last month at a private fundraising event the Democrats, he says, are just looking for a scapegoat. And this morning, President Trump fired off a series of tweets about former campaign aide Carter Page, who's being scrutinized over his possible ties to Russia. The president writes, quote, "So now it is reported that the Democrats who have excoriated Carter Page about Russia don't want him to testify. He blows away their case against him and now wants to clear his name by showing the false or misleading testimony by James Comey, John Brennan. Witch hunt." Let's talk about with Simon Rosenberg, president and founder of the New Democrat Network and a former campaign advisor for President Bill Clinton. Rich Lowry is editor of the National Review and a Fox News contributor. Thanks, both of you, for being here. Do you see a smoking gun somewhere, Simon, in all of this talk about Russia meddling in the elections?
Look, I think it's why there's an investigation. I'm trying to be very deferential to the investigation. We know that all the investigations are being led by Republicans, right? I mean, so attacking Democrats seems a little bit odd to me because we're not actually in control of any of the investigations. And even the appointment of the special counsel, Mueller, a few weeks ago, was done by somebody that Donald Trump himself appointed. So my hope is that these things just go on and we let the chips fall where they may. In a few months. I don't really know what happened, and that's why I hope these investigations get done quickly so the American people have a better understanding of what actually happened.
There's a lot of talk, Rich, about Russian meddling in the elections, but so far there hasn't been any proof that I'm aware of.
Yeah, and you'd think, given how leaky this investigation has been, that if there's a smoking gun there somewhere, we'd already know about it or have serious indications of it. And look, I think they're legitimate questions. I'm with Simon. Let's find out the facts. Let the chips fall where they may. But Devin Nunes is right. One of the reasons Democrats are so emotionally invested in the theory that there is collusion with the Russians is because it's part of the grieving process. They want to delegitimize President Trump, and they want to, as much as possible, drag the administration down into this morass of constant investigation.
Let me take you back, Simon, 4.5 years to Mitt Romney's campaign against Barack Obama for a second term when
he was right.
Mr. Obama said this.
Governor Romney, I'm glad that you recognize that al-Qaeda is a threat, because a few months ago, when you were asked what's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. Not al-Qaeda, you said Russia. In the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back because the Cold War has been over for 20 years.
That was 2012, and now, Simon, all of a sudden Democrats are very concerned about Russia. What's happened in those intervening 5 years?
John McCain actually said yesterday that Russia is a far greater threat to the United States than ISIS or any of the Islamic terrorist organizations. This is a bipartisan concern that Russia has clearly escalated on the global stage. I am worried that Donald Trump is appeasing Russia in an historic way and turning a blind eye to many of their aggressions around the world. I think that, and I hope is that what comes out of this investigation, this conversation, is a far more aggressive policy towards Russia than we've had in the first few months of the Trump administration. I think that is one good thing that could come from this discussion right now. John, I just want to say one last thing. There is no dispute that Russia meddled in the election. The question is whether or not the Trump campaign colluded on it, and we have to keep those things, be clear about that, right? 17 intelligence agencies made it clear there was meddling. We know that things did happen. We know they've done this in other countries. And so I think we have to separate those two things. What we're we're looking at now is, was there collusion? That's the criminal investigation that's going on.
But let's be clear, John, here. This is an extraordinary about-face by progressives and Democrats over Russia, where the Obama administration, they come into office, they do the reset, they do everything possible to bend over backwards to appease the Putin regime, and now all of a sudden it's the greatest threat on the planet. And yes, I want Trump to be tough on Russia, but let's not pretend that President Obama ever was tough on Russia, except for at the very end when he did the minimal he could on sanctions. So it's the Obama administration that the policy you would have thought was bought and paid for Russia because it was so weak and conciliatory for 8 years.
We all remember that moment early in her time as Secretary of State when Hillary Clinton presented the reset button to Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister. There it is. You know, let's get things reset here, said the then Secretary of State. And now, I mean, Simon, I would just ask, would the Russians not be interested, more interested in having Hillary Clinton serve as president than in Donald Trump, based on some of these theatrics?
So our intelligence agencies have concluded that the Russian interference in our election was designed to elect Donald Trump. That is a fact, right? That is not something that's in dispute any longer. And so, you know, that was, and in part because there was a perception in the Russian government that they felt that Hillary Clinton would be much tougher on them. We also know now there's evidence that that they had stuff on people close to Trump, whether they had stuff on Trump himself. We'll find out. Look, since Donald Trump has become president, I could go down a whole list of things, right, about not bringing up Ukraine, not bringing up the nuclear violations, not bringing up Russia's now escalating activities in Latin America, Russia's escalating activities in many other countries around the world, the fact they hacked into the French elections. None of these things are being brought up. Donald Trump hasn't even acknowledged in public that Russia interfered in our own elections, right? He hasn't actually made that. So I am worried that Donald Trump, for whatever reason, is appeasing Russia on the global stage, making America less safe. And to be fair to my colleague here, I'm not going to defend what Obama did on Russia. Let's talk about what Donald Trump is. He's the president now. We got to do a better job than we're doing.
Rich, I will give you the last word next time. I'm getting the wrap from the producers. Thank you both.
All right, John. I'll hold you to that.
Please do. Rich and Simon, thanks.
Well, speaking of Russia, Russian officials saying that its warships stationed in the Mediterranean successfully launched 4 cruise missiles at ISIS targets in Syria near the ancient city of Palmyra, an area heavily damaged by years of fighting between ISIS militants and government forces. Amy Kellogg joins us now live from Milan, Italy, with more. Amy?
Hi, Heather. Well, what does this really mean in the bigger picture? A military analyst, a very prominent one, Heather, I just spoke with in Moscow, a Russian, says himself that actually this was more of a PR stunt than anything else. It was, he said it would have been much more effective to use a combat aircraft that would have been able to drop a lot more ordnance. He said 4 missiles is, quote, nothing. And he said this is a PR exercise for the world, but also for the Russian public who would probably like to see their military taking out ISIS targets. The Russian Ministry of Defense released this video. The 4 cutting-edge caliber cruise missiles were launched from the Eastern Med using one submarine, a Project 636 Varshavyanka called Krasnodar, and a frigate called the Admiral Essen. This may have also been something of a test run for these vessels. Russia's Ministry of Defense says they managed to take out some ISIS hideouts that were housing heavy military equipment, and it's not clear exactly when these strikes took place. The Pentagon does not see it as a, quote, significant event and would not confirm even that the targets had been hit. Now, some Russian military analysts say this was about clearing obstacles in the way of flushing ISIS out of Deir ez-Zor, which, with Raqqa likely to fall at some point in the not-too-distant future, the terror group would like to use as its next stronghold. The top Russia expert at the Eurasia Group tells Fox that there's also an element of messaging here, that the Russia Shia Syrian regime axis will soon take Deir ez-Zor. And finally, Heather, what's important to point out, in addition to all of this, is that Russia did warn the U.S. that these missiles were coming. So at least on a minimal level, those lines of communication between Russia and the U.S. are back up and running after a period when they were frozen out. Heather.
All right. Amy Kellogg, live for us. Thank you.
Well, she's a comedian, but maybe not so funny. Kathy Griffin faces major backlash over her photo holding up a bloody mask of the president. Coming up, why our next guest says Griffin's actions could actually incite violence.
We have to move to Mexico today because we're going to get federal prison.
Some new information on comedian Kathy Griffin. She is now apologizing after she received major backlash for posing with what is meant to be President Trump's bloodied head.
The image is too disturbing. I understand how it offends people. It wasn't funny. I get it. And I beg for your forgiveness. I went too far. I made a mistake and I was wrong.
Well, the president responded to the posting of that controversial video, tweeting, quote, Kathy Griffin should be ashamed of herself. My children, especially my 11-year-old son, Barron, are having a hard time with this. Sick. So could this post land Kathy Griffin in some legal trouble? Let's ask our legal panel. Mercedes Colwin is a criminal defense attorney and Fox News legal analyst. Brian Claypool, also a criminal defense attorney. You're not allowed to threaten the president in any way, or you get a visit, at least from the Secret Service. Mercedes, can you post what is, this, I don't know, pretty sick video showing something representing the president's head severed and get away with that?
We're all pretty sick over it. I mean, many of us have seen the images. It's outrageous. It's completely beyond the realm of any common decency. But it's Kathy Griffin. She's a comedian. She didn't have an intent to incite riot. She didn't have an intent to have anyone go and murder the president. It's outrageous. She should be punished. It's not criminal, though. One of the most sacred rights we have in this country is our right and freedom of expression. It is outrageous. It's beyond the pale, but it's not something that's criminal. And given the fact that we have that right, an inalienable right to freedom of expression, it's not something that's going to land any criminal charges against her.
Brian, do you see it differently?
Well, John, if using bad judgment was a crime, Kathy Griffin would be behind bars right now. But unfortunately, we have a law in place that dates back to 1969. And Mercedes is right. That law looks into the mind of Kathy Griffin. Did she knowingly intend to incite violence? But my view on this is the law needs to be changed. We need a different law that calibrates with social media, with the escalation of social media and how much people rely on social media. This is a public figure who's often on talk shows, who's a comedian, who has tons and millions of followers. So when she is doing something like this, John, I think the law should be different. I think it should say inciting violence should be measured by how many people out there might rely upon this, might be adversely impacted by this, and might actually do something bad and try to harm the president because they see a public figure endorsing such nefarious behavior. So if we get a change in law, then this might stop offensive actions like this.
Mercedes, the law reads you cannot threaten to take the life of, to kidnap, or inflict bodily harm upon an official like the president.
Sure.
Holding up a fake severed head doesn't cross that threshold?
It doesn't, because exactly what Brian said, you have to look at the mens rea. We have someone, Kathy Griffin, we all know she's outrageous. We all know she goes out there and she puts herself out there. We know that she's caused a lot of controversy in the back. So you have to look at her as a person, as the public persona she is, and know. And so she says, look, this is my expression. It was something that I didn't want, that I didn't mean to cause any harm. I certainly did. I know I offended people, and I'm so sorry that I did. Given all that, there's no way that it is going to end up in criminal charges.
Give her credit for at least issuing what appears to be a heartfelt apology. Mercedes Colwin, Brian Claypool, we have to leave it there. Thank you both.
Thank you.
And we're back with more happening now in just a moment.